Get him out of my building. The words cracked through the executive floor like a thunderclap, and for one frozen moment, every eye turned toward the man standing helplessly beside a maintenance cart. Just seconds earlier, Ethan Walker had been thinking about something completely different. He had been thinking about his 8-year-old daughter and whether the $20 left in his wallet would be enough for groceries until Friday. Life had taught Ethan to worry about small things. Rent, utility bills, school lunches, the old Honda that rattled every morning before finally starting. Big problems belonged to rich people, powerful people, people who lived in glass towers above the city skyline. People like Victoria Sinclair. Sinclair Global Headquarters rose 47 stories above downtown Chicago, a monument of steel, glass, and ambition. Thousands of employees passed through its doors every day, yet most never noticed the maintenance staff who quietly kept everything running. Ethan preferred it that way. He arrived before sunrise, fixed what was broken, nodded politely to strangers, and went home to Lily. That was enough. At least, it had always been enough before today. The morning had begun like any other. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as Ethan pushed his cart down a quiet executive hallway. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, gray clouds drifted over Lake Michigan. The city below looked distant and unreal, like a photograph. He checked his work order again. Air conditioning malfunction. Executive private suite. Urgent. Ethan sighed. Executive offices always meant extra pressure. Expensive furniture. Expensive artwork. Expensive people. He knocked twice before entering the outer office. No answer. The assistant's desk sat empty. A meeting must have pulled everyone away. Following protocol, Ethan stepped inside. The suite felt more like a luxury penthouse than an office. Soft lighting glowed against polished wood walls. Fresh flowers stood beside framed business awards. Everything smelled faintly of expensive perfume and coffee. Ethan focused on the task. Find the ventilation issue. Fix it. Leave. That was the job. He opened an access panel near the private conference area and began inspecting the system. A loose connection. Simple enough. 10 minutes, maybe less. The kind of repair he had performed hundreds of times before. Somewhere beyond the hallway, a door opened. Footsteps approached. Ethan barely noticed. He tightened a fitting and reached for a screwdriver. Then everything happened at once. A voice. A sudden movement. A door swinging open. Ethan looked up instinctively. His eyes widened. Shock flashed across his face. Across the room stood Victoria Sinclair herself. For one impossible second, neither of them moved. Then came the scream. It echoed through the executive floor. Ethan immediately turned away. "I'm sorry," he blurted. "I'm so sorry." But the damage was already done. More footsteps thundered toward the suite. Security personnel burst through the doors. Employees emerged from offices. Questions flew from every direction. Nobody stopped to ask what had actually happened. Nobody wanted explanations. They saw the CEO. They saw the maintenance worker. And they filled in the rest themselves. Ethan stood there in stunned silence as the hallway buzzed with whispers. Victoria's face had gone pale with shock and anger. Her eyes locked onto his. Not with understanding. Not with patience. With betrayal. The kind that comes from believing someone has crossed a line that should never be crossed. Ethan felt his stomach sink. He wanted to explain. He wanted to tell her he had only looked up for a fraction of a second. That he never should have been there in the first place. That it had been an accident. But sometimes truth arrives too late. Sometimes assumptions move faster than facts. And as security closed in around him and the whispers spread through the executive floor, Ethan Walker realized that a single unintended moment had just placed his entire life on a path he never saw coming. The elevator ride down felt longer than any Ethan Walker could remember. No one spoke. 2 security officers stood beside him, avoiding eye contact as though silence made the situation easier. Outside the glass walls of the elevator, floor after floor slipped past in a blur of polished offices and expensive conference rooms. Somewhere above, executives continued their meetings. Somewhere above, careers moved forward. Ethan felt as if his head just stopped. By the time the doors opened into the main lobby, the story had already begun spreading. He could feel it in the stairs. Hear it in the hushed conversations that died the moment he walked past. The receptionist who usually greeted him every morning suddenly looked away. A group of employees standing near the coffee station exchanged glances. One shook his head slowly. Another whispered something Ethan could not hear. He did not need to. Human beings had always been talented at filling empty spaces with assumptions. Within minutes, assumptions often became facts in people's minds. A member of Human Resources was waiting in a small conference room near the lobby. The woman looked uncomfortable before Ethan had even sat down. A folder rested on the table between them. She cleared her throat. Ethan already knew what was coming. "Mr. Walker," she began softly. "Pending an internal review, your employment has been suspended effective immediately." The words landed heavily, but Ethan did not argue. He simply nodded. The woman seemed surprised. "Do you have anything you would like to say?" For a moment, he stared at the polished tabletop. The reflection staring back looked older than 39. More tired. "It was an accident," he said quietly. "That is all." She waited as if expecting more. A defense. An explanation. Anger. Ethan offered none of them. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. He emptied his locker, collected his lunchbox, folded his company jacket over one arm. Then he stepped outside into the cold Chicago afternoon. The wind coming off Lake Michigan carried the scent of rain. Gray clouds stretched across the skyline. Traffic moved steadily below the towering buildings. Life continued as though nothing had happened. Ethan stood on the sidewalk for several seconds, uncertain where to go. Then his phone buzzed. A text message. 3 simple words. "Love you, Daddy." Attached was a photo from Lily. She sat at a classroom desk missing one front tooth, smiling proudly while holding a drawing covered in bright markers and glitter. Ethan closed his eyes. The knot in his chest tightened. That little girl trusted him completely. She believed he could fix anything. Broken toys. Scraped knees. Bad dreams. The truth was much harder. Some things could not be repaired with tools and patience. Some things arrived all at once and changed everything. Across town, Victoria Sinclair sat alone inside her private office. The building had finally grown quiet. The crowd was gone. The questions had stopped. Yet the image refused to leave her mind. Ethan's face. Not guilty. Not calculating. Shocked. Embarrassed. Almost apologetic before she had spoken a single word. Victoria stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. For years she had built a reputation on discipline and control. Nothing caught her off guard. Nothing. Yet today had shaken her in ways she could not explain. Her assistant knocked lightly and entered. "Security completed their reports," she said. Victoria nodded. "Thank you." The assistant hesitated. "Everyone is talking about it." Victoria's expression hardened. Let them talk. But after the door closed again, she found herself staring toward the conference table where several security files now waited. Something about the entire situation felt wrong. Not dangerous. Not sinister. Wrong in a quieter way. The kind of feeling that lingered beneath the surface long after logic insisted otherwise. Meanwhile, Ethan pulled into the parking lot of Lily's elementary school just as classes ended. Children poured through the front doors carrying backpacks nearly as large as themselves. Then he saw her. Lily spotted his car and immediately ran forward with a smile bright enough to cut through any storm. "Daddy!" she shouted. Ethan stepped out and opened his arms. She hugged him tightly. "You look sad," she said after pulling away. Children noticed things adults missed. Ethan forced a small smile. "Long day at work." Lily studied him for another moment before slipping her hand into his. "That is okay," she said. "We still have each other." Ethan looked down at her and felt something break and heal at the same time. Because neither of them knew it yet, but the long day was only the beginning. Far above them, inside one of the most powerful companies in America, questions were starting to form. And questions, when followed honestly, often led people directly toward truths they never expected to find. That evening, rain tapped softly against the windows of Ethan Walker's small apartment as the city settled into darkness. The building was old, the hallway carpets worn thin from decades of footsteps, but it was home. Lily sat at the kitchen table coloring a picture while Ethan stood at the stove stirring a pot of soup. The scent of chicken broth and vegetables filled the room, creating a warmth that money could never buy. Yet even here, surrounded by the familiar rhythm of ordinary life, his thoughts refused to quiet down. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the executive floor. The startled look, the accusations hidden behind shocked faces, the feeling of watching an entire reputation crumble in less than a minute. Lily glanced up from her drawing. "Did something bad happen at work?" she asked softly. Ethan hesitated. Children deserved honesty, but they also deserved peace. Just some grown-up problems, he replied. Lily nodded as though that explained everything. Then she returned to her crayons. A few seconds later she spoke again. Mom used to say that when people do not know the whole story, they usually guess the wrong one. Ethan froze. It had been years since his wife passed away, but sometimes Lily would repeat something she remembered, and it felt as though a voice from the past had briefly stepped back into the room. He smiled faintly. Your mom was a smart woman. Across the city, Victoria Sinclair sat alone in her penthouse office long after most of the building had emptied. The skyline glowed outside her windows, thousands of lights scattered across the darkness like distant stars. Normally, she thrived in moments like this. Quiet hours, strategic planning, important decisions, control. Tonight, however, her attention kept drifting back to the security reports lying unopened on her desk. She finally reached for them. Page after page detailed employee statements, timelines, and security observations. Most repeated the same assumptions. Most described what people thought they had witnessed. Victoria read every word carefully. Then something caught her attention. A timestamp. She looked closer. The maintenance request had been approved only minutes before the incident. Ethan had been assigned to repair the ventilation system through official channels. Another document confirmed he had checked in exactly where he was supposed to be. Victoria leaned back slowly. The certainty she had felt earlier began to crack. Not because she suddenly had answers, because she realized she might not have asked the right questions. Meanwhile, Ethan sat at the kitchen table helping Lily with her math homework. Numbers usually made sense. They followed rules. Problems had solutions. Life was different. After Lily went to bed, he opened his laptop and reviewed job listings. Building maintenance, repair technician, warehouse supervisor. Dozens of applications. Hundreds of applicants. He rubbed his tired eyes. The suspension might become permanent. If that happened, he would need a backup plan quickly. Rent was due in 2 weeks. School expenses were coming. Reality rarely waited for justice. The next morning arrived cold and gray. Ethan dropped Lily off at school before heading across town to pick up a temporary repair job from an old friend. The work paid less than half his normal wage, but it was something. As he climbed a ladder to replace damaged wiring inside a neighborhood grocery store, he tried focusing on the task in front of him. Yet whispers seemed to follow him even outside Sinclair Global. News traveled fast in professional circles. By lunchtime, he noticed people recognizing him. A cashier stared a little too long. A customer whispered while scrolling through a phone. The story was spreading beyond the company walls now. Back at Sinclair Global, Victoria entered a board meeting, but her concentration drifted repeatedly. Executives discussed quarterly earnings, market forecasts, expansion plans. Their voices blurred together. One question continued echoing in her mind. What if she had judged a man before knowing the truth? The thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. Because deep down, beneath the confidence, the wealth, and the power, Victoria Sinclair valued one thing above all else: truth. And for the first time since the incident, she was beginning to fear that the truth might look very different from what everyone believed. 2 days later, Victoria Sinclair did something she almost never did. She canceled a lunch meeting worth millions of dollars and walked into the security department herself. The room fell quiet the moment she entered. Monitors glowed against dim walls. Surveillance footage from every floor of the building flickered across dozens of screens. I want the recordings from the executive suite, she said calmly. The security manager blinked. The recordings, ma'am? All of them. Minutes later, Victoria sat alone in a private viewing room. The footage began playing. There was no dramatic music, no shocking revelation, just ordinary moments unfolding exactly as cameras captured them. Employees passing through hallways, assistants carrying folders, maintenance staff moving equipment. Then Ethan appeared. Victoria leaned forward slightly. He looked exactly as she remembered. Focused, quiet, unremarkable in the way honest people often are. The video showed him checking the work order, entering the suite after receiving authorization, inspecting the ventilation system. Working, nothing else. Victoria watched carefully. Then she rewound the footage. Again and again. Every second told the same story. Ethan never wandered, never lingered, never behaved suspiciously. He simply did the job he had been assigned to do. The knot in her stomach tightened. She moved to another camera angle. This one showed the hallway outside her private office. Her eyes narrowed. There it was. The detail everyone had missed. The assistant who normally controlled access had been called away unexpectedly. A scheduling error had left the area temporarily unattended. Ethan had no way of knowing anyone was inside. No warning. No indication. Just unfortunate timing. Victoria sat back slowly. The room felt strangely quiet. Not because she had discovered something shocking. Because she had discovered something simple. Ethan Walker might have been telling the truth all along. Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan climbed down from another ladder after finishing a repair job at a neighborhood apartment complex. The temporary work was exhausting. Less pay, longer hours, no benefits. But every dollar mattered. As he packed away his tools, his phone buzzed. Another message from Lily's teacher. Parent art night next Thursday. Families encouraged to attend. Ethan smiled despite himself. Lily loved events like that. She always believed every small moment deserved celebration. The smile faded as quickly as it appeared. He wondered whether he would still be able to afford the extra supplies she needed for school next month. One problem had become 10. 10 had become 20. That was how hardship worked. It multiplied quietly when no one was looking. That evening, Victoria drove home through downtown traffic, but instead of heading directly to her penthouse, she found herself taking a different route. The city blurred past her windshield. Coffee shops, apartment buildings, small businesses tucked between larger developments. Places she rarely visited. Places where ordinary people build ordinary lives. She was not searching for anything specific. At least that was what she told herself. Yet when she passed a modest elementary school, she slowed slightly. Children were playing on a nearby field while parents waited near the fence. Families, conversations, laughter. A different world from boardrooms and shareholder meetings. For reasons she could not fully explain, she found herself wondering what Ethan's life looked like beyond the uniform and maintenance cart. The next morning brought another surprise. A member of Human Resources delivered additional documents to Victoria's office. Employee evaluations, attendance records, performance reviews. She skimmed through them casually at first, then more carefully, then very carefully. The same descriptions appeared again and again. Reliable, respectful, honest, always willing to help others. Never received a formal complaint. One supervisor even wrote, "If every employee carried themselves with Ethan Walker's character, management would be easy." Victoria stared at the sentence for a long moment. Character. It was a word she valued deeply. Harder to measure than profit. More important than talent. Suddenly, the image of Ethan standing silently in that hallway returned to her mind. He had not shouted. He had not blamed anyone. He had not demanded fairness. He had simply accepted humiliation with a dignity she rarely saw in powerful people. Outside her office window, the city stretched toward the horizon beneath a pale morning sky. Victoria looked down at the file resting on her desk. For the first time since the incident, she stopped seeing Ethan as a maintenance worker caught in an unfortunate situation. She started seeing him as a person. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet feeling began to grow. Not certainty, not forgiveness. Something far more unsettling. Doubt. The kind of doubt that appears just before a person realizes they may owe someone an apology. The following Saturday arrived with a pale blue sky and the kind of cool spring air that made Chicago feel almost gentle. Ethan Walker stood beside a folding table inside Lily's elementary school gymnasium, helping tape colorful artwork to a display board. Children's laughter echoed across the room. Parents carried trays of cookies. Teachers moved from table to table offering encouragement and smiles. It was not a world of stock prices or executive decisions. It was a world of finger paint, construction paper, and proud children eager to show their families what they had created. For a few hours, Ethan almost forgot about everything else. Lily certainly had. She bounced excitedly between displays, proudly introducing her father to classmates and teachers. "My dad can fix anything," she announced at least 3 times before noon. Ethan laughed each time. The words warmed him more than he wanted to admit. Children saw people differently. They measured worth in kindness instead of status, in effort instead of titles. If only adults remembered how to do the same. Across town, Victoria Sinclair sat inside the back seat of a black sedan staring out the window. She had spent the entire week trying to focus on business, yet her thoughts kept returning to the same unanswered questions. Eventually, curiosity overcame pride. Earlier that morning, she had quietly asked Human Resources for Ethan's emergency contact information. Company policy allowed limited access for executive review purposes. She told herself she only wanted context, nothing more. Yet now, as the driver followed directions toward a neighborhood she had never visited, even she knew the explanation felt incomplete. The streets gradually changed. Glass towers gave way to brick apartment buildings. Luxury storefronts disappeared. Small diners, corner grocery stores, and family-owned businesses took their place. Victoria watched people carrying groceries, walking dogs, pushing strollers. Ordinary lives. Ordinary struggles. The kind she rarely saw from behind boardroom walls. When the sedan stopped near the elementary school, Victoria hesitated. This was ridiculous. She was the chief executive officer of a multinational corporation. She had shareholders to answer to and billion-dollar decisions waiting on her desk. Yet somehow she found herself stepping out of the car and walking toward a school art fair. Inside the gymnasium, she remained unnoticed at first. Parents were too busy admiring paintings and photographs created by children. Victoria moved quietly through the crowd. Then she saw him. Ethan stood near a display covered in colorful drawings. He was smiling. Not the polite smile employees used around executives. A real smile. Relaxed. Genuine. Beside him stood a little girl with bright eyes and untamed blonde hair. Lily. Victoria recognized her immediately from the employee records she had reviewed. The child was proudly explaining every piece of artwork on the wall, while Ethan listened as though each drawing belonged in a museum. Victoria stopped several feet away. Something about the scene caught her off guard. There was no bitterness in Ethan's face. No anger. No self-pity. Despite everything that had happened, he seemed fully present in that moment with his daughter. Lily suddenly pointed toward a watercolor painting. "That one is my favorite," she said. Ethan studied it carefully. "Tell me why." "Because it is not perfect," Lily answered. "See?" She pointed at a crooked section near the corner. "I messed up, but my teacher said mistakes can become part of the picture." Ethan smiled softly. "Sounds like a smart teacher." Victoria felt those words land somewhere deeper than she expected. Mistakes can become part of the picture. The phrase lingered in her mind. Before she realized it, she had taken another step closer. A teacher passing by recognized her immediately. Surprise flashed across the woman's face. "Miss Sinclair?" she asked. Ethan turned. For the first time since the incident, their eyes met without security guards, executives, or whispered accusations surrounding them. The noise of the gymnasium seemed to fade for a brief moment. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Yet something had changed. Victoria no longer saw a maintenance worker connected to an embarrassing incident. She saw a father. Ethan no longer saw an untouchable executive behind a glass office door. He saw a woman standing alone, looking strangely uncertain. And somewhere between them, unnoticed by either adult, Lily Walker was about to become the one person capable of changing everything. For a few long seconds, neither Ethan nor Victoria seemed to know what to say. Around them, the gymnasium remained alive with laughter, conversations, and excited children showing off their artwork. Yet the space between them felt strangely still. It was Lily who broke the silence. "Daddy, who is she?" she asked innocently, looking up with wide, curious eyes. Ethan hesitated. Victoria noticed it immediately. The uncertainty, the caution, the quiet effort to protect a child from adult complications. "This is Miss Sinclair," Ethan finally said. "She works at my company." Victoria offered a small smile. "Nice to meet you, Lily." Lily smiled back instantly. Children often judged people faster than adults, but they also judged them differently. They looked for kindness, not status. "Are you rich?" Lily asked. Ethan nearly closed his eyes. Victoria blinked in surprise. Then, to her own astonishment, she laughed softly. "I suppose some people would say yes." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "My dad says rich people are still people." Ethan groaned quietly. "Lily." "What?" she asked. "You did say that." Victoria looked at Ethan. For the first time, there was no tension in her expression. No authority. No executive distance. Only curiosity. "That sounds like something worth teaching." Ethan shrugged. It seemed important. Before the conversation could continue, Lily grabbed Victoria's hand unexpectedly. "Come see my paintings." Victoria froze for half a second. Few people touched her without permission. Fewer still did so without any awareness of who she was. Yet there was nothing uncomfortable about Lily's gesture. It felt genuine, natural. Before she realized it, Victoria allowed herself to be pulled toward the display wall. One by one, Lily proudly explained every drawing. A watercolor sunset, a sketch of a dog she wished they owned, a portrait of Ethan standing beside their apartment building. Victoria listened carefully. The pictures themselves were charming, but it was the way Lily spoke about her father that captured her attention. Every story seemed to circle back to him. How he fixed broken bicycles, how he attended every school event, how he made pancakes shaped like animals on Saturdays, even when they turned out crooked, how he always knew when she was sad. Victoria glanced toward Ethan several times. Each time she found him quietly standing nearby, letting his daughter shine. Not interrupting, not seeking attention, just present. The realization stirred something uncomfortable inside her. Over the years, she had met senators, celebrities, investors, and industry leaders. Yet very few people had impressed her the way this ordinary father suddenly did. Eventually, the event began winding down. Families started collecting artwork and saying goodbye. Teachers stacked chairs. The cheerful noise gradually softened. Lily carefully packed her paintings into a large folder while Ethan helped gather supplies. Victoria knew this was her chance. If she walked away now, the distance between them might become permanent. "Mr. Walker," she said quietly. Ethan looked up. "May I speak with you for a moment?" The question seemed simple enough. Yet both understood it carried much more weight. Ethan glanced toward Lily. She was busy organizing her artwork. "Sure." They stepped several feet away near a row of empty folding chairs. Outside the gym windows, the afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the parking lot. Victoria folded her hands together briefly. For perhaps the first time in years, she felt nervous. "I reviewed the security footage," she said. Ethan remained silent. "I also reviewed the maintenance records." Still he said nothing. Victoria took a slow breath. "I believe there are aspects of what happened that deserve a closer look." Ethan studied her carefully, not with anger, not with hope, simply caution, the kind that develops after disappointment. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but what happened already happened." The words struck her harder than she expected. Because he was right. Facts could be investigated. Policies could be reviewed. But humiliation had a way of leaving marks that paperwork could not erase. Before Victoria could respond, a voice called her name from across the gym. One of her senior executives was approaching quickly. He looked surprised to find her there. Very surprised. His smile appeared polished, but something about it felt forced. "Victoria," he said, "I have been trying to reach you all afternoon." The man's eyes briefly shifted toward Ethan, then back to Victoria. Something cold flickered behind his expression before disappearing just as quickly. Victoria noticed it. So did Ethan. Neither said a word. Yet as the executive launched into an explanation about urgent company matters, an uneasy feeling settled into the room. The kind that arrives before larger problems reveal themselves. Because while Ethan and Victoria were only beginning to understand each other, somewhere behind the polished walls of Sinclair Global, other people were paying close attention. And not everyone wanted the truth to come to light. The drive home from the school felt unusually quiet. Lily sat in the back seat hugging her folder of artwork while Ethan focused on the road ahead. The late afternoon sun painted the city in shades of gold and amber. Traffic flowed steadily through the streets, but Ethan's thoughts remained trapped inside that gymnasium. Victoria Sinclair's expression had stayed with him. There had been something different in her eyes. Not judgment, not authority, something closer to regret. Yet experience had taught him not to expect too much from people in positions of power. Expectations often became disappointments. Hope was expensive, and right now, Ethan could not afford expensive things. Meanwhile, 20 floors above downtown Chicago, Victoria sat in a conference room surrounded by senior executives. Financial reports covered the polished table. Graphs and projections glowed across a massive presentation screen. Yet despite the importance of the meeting, one person kept drawing her attention. Richard Holloway, Executive Vice President, Trusted Advisor, 20 years with Sinclair Global. The same executive who had interrupted her conversation with Ethan at the school. Richard spoke confidently about upcoming acquisitions and expansion plans. Everyone listened. Everyone nodded. Yet Victoria noticed something she had never paid attention to before. Whenever Ethan's situation was mentioned, even indirectly, Richard's demeanor shifted. It was subtle, almost invisible, A tightened jaw, a glance away from the discussion, a change in tone. Small things. But leadership often depended on noticing small things. By the end of the meeting, a quiet unease had settled in her chest. Later that evening, Ethan accepted another temporary repair assignment. The work took him to a commercial warehouse on the edge of the city. The building belonged to a logistics company that happened to lease storage space from several large corporations, including Sinclair Global. It was routine work. Faulty electrical systems. Damaged control panels. Nothing unusual. Ethan preferred it that way. Problems made sense when they involved wires and machinery. Machines followed rules. People rarely did. Hours passed as he worked alone beneath fluorescent lights. The warehouse echoed with distant machinery and the occasional hum of delivery trucks outside. Around 9 o'clock, Ethan finished repairing a control unit and headed toward a maintenance office to file his paperwork. That was when he noticed something strange. Two men were standing inside a nearby conference room. The blinds were partially closed. Their voices carried faintly through the gap in the doorway. Ethan had no intention of listening. He was simply passing by. Then he heard a familiar name. Sinclair. His footsteps slowed instinctively. One of the men spoke in a tense whisper. "The review cannot continue." The other answered. "Victoria is already asking questions." Ethan frowned. Something about the conversation felt wrong. Not criminal. Not dramatic. Just wrong. The kind of conversation people only have when they believe nobody is listening. He moved away immediately. Whatever they were discussing was none of his business. Yet as he reached the parking lot, fragments of the conversation continued replaying in his mind. Questions, reviews, concern about executive oversight. The words felt oddly connected to everything happening at Sinclair Global. Back at home, Lily had already fallen asleep on the couch waiting for him. Her artwork folder rested beside her. Ethan smiled softly and carried her to bed. As he pulled the blanket over her shoulders, a drawing slipped from the folder and drifted onto the floor. He picked it up carefully. The picture showed 3 people standing together beneath a bright yellow sun. Ethan recognized himself immediately. Lily stood beside him holding his hand. The third figure surprised him. It was a woman with long hair wearing a blue dress. There was no name written anywhere. Yet somehow Ethan already knew who Lily had imagined. He stared at the drawing for several seconds before quietly setting it aside. Across the city, Victoria sat alone in her office reviewing internal audit reports. Page after page revealed small inconsistencies. Nothing large enough to trigger alarms. Nothing dramatic enough to attract attention. Yet together they formed a pattern she could not ignore. Missing approvals. Delayed disclosures. Unusual transfers between departments. Tiny cracks hidden beneath a flawless surface. Her phone buzzed. A message from Richard Holloway appeared on the screen. Simple, professional, polite. Yet for the first time in years, reading it made her uncomfortable. Victoria stood and walked toward the windows overlooking the city lights. Somewhere below, millions of lives continued moving forward. Somewhere below, Ethan Walker was trying to rebuild his future one day at a time. And somewhere inside her own company, hidden beneath years of trust and success, she was beginning to suspect that a much larger problem had been quietly growing in the shadows. The troubling part was not what she knew. The troubling part was how much she still did not know. The following week felt like the calm before a storm that nobody could quite see. Sinclair Global continued operating as if nothing had changed. Employees attended meetings. Executives discussed growth strategies. Investors praised quarterly performance. From the outside, the company looked stronger than ever. Yet beneath the polished surface, tension was quietly building. Victoria Sinclair felt it every day. The deeper she looked into the company records, the more questions emerged. Small inconsistencies had become larger patterns. Missing documentation connected to financial decisions. Internal approvals that seemed rushed. Transactions that technically followed policy, yet somehow felt designed to avoid scrutiny. Nothing proved wrongdoing. Not yet. But the feeling would not leave her. Someone inside the company was hiding something. One afternoon, Victoria sat with a team of independent auditors in a private conference room. Thick binders covered the table. Charts filled the screens. Hours passed as they reviewed records line by line. Finally, one auditor leaned forward. "There is a common thread," he said carefully. Several unusual approvals appear to originate from departments reporting through executive operations. Victoria remained still. Executive operations fell under Richard Holloway's authority. The room grew quiet. No one rushed to conclusions. No one made accusations. Yet everyone understood the significance. Trust was one of the most valuable assets in any organization. Once damaged, it could take years to restore. Meanwhile, Ethan Walker continued taking every repair job he could find. Long days blended together. Warehouses, apartment complexes, office buildings. He left home before sunrise and returned after dark. The work was honest, but the uncertainty weighed heavily on him. One evening, he sat at the kitchen table reviewing bills while Lily colored beside him. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional scratch of crayons across paper. "Daddy," Lily asked. Ethan looked up. "What is it? Are you going back to your old job?" The question lingered between them. Ethan forced a gentle smile. "I do not know yet." Lily nodded slowly. "I think they made a mistake." Ethan stared at her. Children had a way of reaching truths adults complicated. "Why do you think that?" he asked. Lily shrugged. "Because when people are good, sometimes other people forget to look closely." Ethan looked away for a moment. The words struck deeper than she could possibly understand. Across the city, Victoria received an unexpected phone call from the head of Human Resources. The investigation surrounding Ethan's suspension had officially concluded. The findings were clear. Ethan had followed company procedures. He had entered the executive suite through an authorized work order. There was no evidence of misconduct, no policy violation, no intentional wrongdoing. Victoria thanked the caller and slowly lowered the phone. For several moments, she simply sat there staring at the skyline beyond her office windows. The truth she had been approaching for weeks now stood directly in front of her. Ethan Walker had suffered humiliation, professional damage, and financial hardship because assumptions had moved faster than facts. Worse still, she had been part of it. The realization settled heavily across her shoulders. Yet before she could decide how to address the situation, another complication emerged. News of the financial review had begun spreading through senior leadership. Questions were being asked. Documents were disappearing. Meetings were suddenly being rescheduled. The atmosphere inside Sinclair Global had shifted. People who once appeared comfortable now seemed nervous. People who once welcomed oversight suddenly resisted it. The company felt less like a corporation and more like a chessboard. Everyone was moving. Everyone was watching. Late that evening, Ethan received a call from an unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it. Almost. Something told him to answer. "Mr. Walker?" a professional voice asked. "This is Victoria Sinclair's office. Miss Sinclair would like to meet with you tomorrow morning." Ethan remained silent. The city lights flickered beyond his apartment window. Lily slept peacefully down the hall. The invitation sounded simple. Yet nothing about it felt simple. "Why?" he finally asked. There was a brief pause. "She believes there are matters that need to be corrected." After the call ended, Ethan sat alone in the darkness for a long time. Part of him wanted to refuse. Part of him wanted answers. Part of him wanted to leave the entire situation behind forever. Across the city, Victoria stood alone in her office reviewing a prepared statement she had rewritten 3 separate times. None of the words felt sufficient. None of them seemed large enough to address what had happened. Outside her window, thunderclouds gathered over the horizon. Inside the company, pressure continued mounting. And by the time the sun rose the next morning, both Ethan Walker and Victoria Sinclair would find themselves standing at the edge of a moment capable of changing far more than either of them realized. The next morning arrived beneath a blanket of gray clouds, and the city seemed to hold its breath. Ethan Walker stood in front of Sinclair Global once again, staring up at the glass tower that had nearly broken his life apart. A few weeks earlier, he had walked through those doors as an employee. Then he had left as the subject of whispers and assumptions. Now he was returning as something else entirely. He just did not know what. Inside the executive boardroom, silence filled the air. Senior leaders sat around the long, polished table. Independent auditors occupied several seats near the far wall. Victoria Sinclair stood near the windows overlooking downtown Chicago, calm on the outside, determined on the inside. When Ethan entered the room, every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward him. The same man many had quietly judged now stood before them again. He wore a simple button-down shirt. No expensive suit. No title. No power. Only dignity. Victoria stepped forward first. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "I almost did not." A faint smile crossed her face. I would not have blamed you. Then she turned toward the room. The executives straightened in their chairs. The auditors opened their files. Victoria took a slow breath. Today is about truth, she said. And truth deserves to be heard completely. What followed lasted nearly 2 hours. The investigation findings were presented. Security footage was reviewed. Internal reports were examined. Every fact pointed in the same direction. Ethan Walker had done nothing wrong. He had followed procedure. He had entered an authorized work area. The incident had been a misunderstanding from beginning to end. More importantly, the broader audit revealed serious failures within executive oversight. Richard Holloway's department had concealed financial irregularities for years. Not dramatic crimes. Not sensational scandals. Something more common and more dangerous. A culture where accountability had slowly disappeared. The auditors presented their conclusions. Richard offered explanations. Then more evidence appeared. Eventually the room fell silent. No arguments remained. No excuses survived. The truth had arrived. And when truth finally enters a room, pride rarely survives beside it. Richard quietly submitted his resignation before the meeting ended. Several policy reforms were approved immediately. Yet none of those developments became the moment people remembered. The moment they remembered came afterward. Victoria walked to the center of the room and faced Ethan directly. The executives watched. The auditors watched. Employees joining remotely watched. Hundreds of people throughout the company watched. Victoria's voice remained steady. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I owe you an apology." The room became perfectly still. I allowed assumptions to influence my judgment. I failed to seek the truth before reaching conclusions. Because of that failure, you experienced embarrassment, hardship, and unfair treatment. She paused. I am deeply sorry. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Sometimes the most powerful sound is silence. Ethan looked at her for several moments. Then he nodded. Not dramatically. Not triumphantly. Just quietly. Thank you, he said. That means more than you know. Victoria reached into a folder resting on the table. Your employment is fully reinstated if you choose to return. Your lost wages have been restored, and the company will publicly correct the record. Another silence followed. Then Ethan surprised everyone. I appreciate that, he said. But before I decide, I need to ask something. Victoria nodded. Anything. Ethan smiled faintly. Will people be treated differently from now on? The question landed harder than any accusation could have. Not because it attacked anyone, because it challenged everyone. Victoria met his eyes. Yes, she said. They will. Weeks later, the changes became visible throughout Sinclair Global. New accountability systems were introduced. Employee concerns received greater attention. Respect became more than a corporate slogan. It became a standard. Ethan eventually accepted a new role within facilities management, one that recognized both his experience and his character. But the greatest change happened outside the office. On a bright Saturday afternoon, Victoria visited the same elementary school where everything had begun to change. Lily spotted her immediately and ran across the playground with a smile. You came back, Lily said. Victoria laughed softly. I did. Lily looked up thoughtfully. Daddy says good people apologize when they make mistakes. Victoria glanced toward Ethan, who stood nearby watching with quiet amusement. Your daddy is very wise. Lily considered this for a moment. Then she took Victoria's hand. I think my picture was right. Victoria blinked. What picture? Lily grinned. The one with all three of us. Ethan shook his head, embarrassed. Victoria laughed again, a genuine laugh this time, and for the first time in many years, it felt easy. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the playground as the three of them walked together. No grand speeches. No dramatic music. No fairy tale ending. Just three people carrying a little more understanding than they had before. Because sometimes life does not change forever through power or wealth. Sometimes it changes through humility, through second chances, through the courage to admit a mistake and the grace to forgive one. And if this story reminded you that dignity speaks louder than pride, or that truth eventually finds its way into the light, share your thoughts below. We would love to hear where this story touched your heart. And if stories about grace, redemption, and quiet strength mean something to you, consider joining us again for the next journey.